Boom. Oh, I just found out something, by the way, as a quick conversation starter, which maybe we should. I'll mention it. So I just posted a thing about when people create forks to submit a PR to an open source project. How, as a maintainer, if I review that and I just want to like contribute back a snippet of code, which I was doing that yesterday with Chris Wicks, where he was working on a feature. I pulled it, I looked at it. He has access to the repo too, so it's like a branch within the main core repo. And I was like, oh, we could just do this. And I like checked in code, pushed it, he pulled, he checked in code, I pulled, and it was kind of a cool workflow. And then I thought back, like when I've tried to do that with other people's PRs, if they were doing it from a fork, I didn't have access to actually push to that.
Mhm.
And I thought that was a really big inconvenience. And I think I just found out from people posting on Twitter, which is great, is that if they create the PR from their main branch, I won't have access to it. But if they create a separate branch, I might have access to it. There's also maybe a setting when they create a PR that
Yeah,
you
there's
can
a
check
setting.
of whether or not I can contribute, like the maintainer can contribute back. So you knew that?
Yeah, I've seen that checkbox
Yeah,
before.
there's
Yeah.
definitely a setting, and I think you can change it at any time. So just because like you
Mm,
can't access it initially, I'm pretty sure that they can go back and check it, and then you have access to their fork.
okay, cool. Yeah, I felt like that was a really big downside to the whole PR process. And it seems silly, but it seems like there's also like easy ways to fix that if I know what I'm looking for. And a lot of the times in this type of stuff, I don't until I learn.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, you don't know you need it until you stumble across it,
Yeah.
and then you go looking in the settings for it.
Yep.
Did anybody else see the eclipse yesterday? 2 days ago now.
Was it not yesterday?
Yes,
Was it
we were at
2 days?
we drove to Totality. It was on Monday, right? Yeah,
Nice. Yeah, it passed,
it's
like,
great.
right over our house, so it was wild.
Yeah. You, like, live in Totality, right?
Yeah, we were, like, right in the path. It was super cool.
Does totality mean fully blocked?
Yeah,
So was it like legitimately dark?
it was, like, nighttime out in the middle
Oh, it
of the day.
was.
It was
Okay.
crazy, yeah.
Okay. So it got
It was
darker
so
for
cool.
us.
And
Yeah.
cold.
And a little cold, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh,
then,
that's
like,
interesting.
the coolest part was, like, just the ring around the moon when it got
Yeah.
fully in
Yeah.
front of the sun. Because I thought it was like, okay, I thought the sky was just gonna be dark. No, there was, like, this crazy halo effect of the sun around the moon. It looked, like, otherworldly. It was super cool.
Yeah, it was like but somebody asked me to describe it, and, I can only describe so much because it was just, I don't know, almost mind-blowing, like, because you see the sun every day and it's normal, and I don't know if that's the reason why, but, like, suddenly everything you've ever known is different for 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, yeah, most of the time, like, eclipses or the planets and stuff are just, like, whatever, and it's like it makes you become a science nerd or, like, an astronomy nerd as soon as you start watching it, because it just brings that out of you. But, okay, it got me thinking, right? If if the moon is rotating around the Earth, and the Earth is going around the sun, and the Earth is spinning, like, how many eclipses are there in a given, like, day? Is there an eclipse every day, right? Do they cross paths at least once a day?
No.
I've
No?
heard, I don't know how often. I've heard there are a lot of eclipses. They're just usually, and I don't know what a lot is. So like I don't know that that's every day or it's like every 30 days or I have no idea. But they're just usually
I've
in
got the answer.
places that are in like the middle of the ocean or something where we just wouldn't see it. Yeah, Becca, enlighten
Yeah.
us.
So a quick Google, or okay, so this is just a total tangent, but, like, I always use our generation, I feel like says, "Hey, let's Google this thing." But, like, my
Mhm.
kids' generation says, "Let's search it up." So,
Search
I
it up.
Search it up.
They don't
searched it up
know
on Google,
they don't know what the
and
origin of search is. Google
I
failed
didn't
them.
know that
Ask
my kids weren't
Jeeves.
the only ones that did it, but then somebody tweeted about it, and I was like, "Yeah, my kids search it up too."
Search
Um,
it up.
every 1 to 3 years, somewhere around the globe, there is an eclipse, but are often only visible from Earth's poles or from the middle of the ocean. So you
Wait,
Hmm.
were on the right track.
that blows my mind, though, like, with so much movement happening at all times, they only cross paths 1 to 3 years? That's crazy.
And I think ours is the only solar system that they believe these solar eclipses happen. I read that somewhere, but somebody fact check that.
That's also crazy because don't some planets have like 12 moons or something? And it's like,
Yeah.
you're telling me
Yeah.
one of those doesn't go in front of their star?
Huh.
Yeah. It's wild out there.
I feel like there's a lot to think about there.
It also looks
Also
like a
the-
huge eyeball.
What the eclipse itself?
Yeah, because like the eclipse looks like the wait,
Pupil.
what's the black part of your eye called?
Pupil?
Pupil.
I guess. Yeah.
And then the outside, because it had like striations or something,
Yeah.
looked like
okay.
the iris.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
someone's watching us.
Yeah.
True. Also, the cicadas are coming.
Not
What?
for us.
Is it regionally?
It's regional. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never heard about this in Texas.
Oh, do you have
Oh.
cicadas?
Yeah, we've got some, but not like a crazy amount.
Oh, like we
Oh.
have 7 and 17-year ones. James, you probably do too. I feel like we're
Yeah, I don't know any details, so I couldn't even make up a number. I mean, I could make up a number, but I would be making up a number, so I don't know.
I was a lifeguard for a lot of years when I was a kid. And we had the 17-year cicadas when I was lifeguarding. And I'll never forget, I was like up in the lifeguard chair and one flew in my hair and it was stuck in there, just like buzzing around.
Did you jump off into the
It's not
water?
ideal. I did not jump into the water because that would have just matted it further into my hair. But I did scream and jump down and say, somebody get this out of my hair.
Sounds legitimate.
We play this game where we sit on the back porch with a plastic kid's bat and just smack June bugs as they fly by.
Oh, yeah. June bugs are the worst. They eat
I
all
don't
my
actually know
raspberries.
what that is. I know
A
the
June bug?
name. Yeah, but I don't know what it actually is.
They just
You
kind of
would know a June
annoyingly
bug if you
fly
saw it.
around.
Probably.
Mm.
Do
They're
they only
like-
come out in June?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nah.
And in my area, they come out in June.
Otherwise, they'd be July bugs.
They're April bugs
Had
right
to
now.
do it. Oh, okay.
Yeah. The
How many people watching are super interested in our conversation right now? Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM.
The
Oh,
one
are y'all
about
ready to-
astronomy and insects.
Yeah, and insects. Yes, taking a large pivot on this one. Are y'all ready to kick it off?
Yeah.
Cool. And we don't have like an outline. This is us just kind of going on some things that Brad mentioned before we went live, and some stuff that Beck and I talked about yesterday in her open source space, and we'll kind of see where it goes. But obviously, for people listening in, if you have questions, comments, things you want us to address or answer or hypothesize about, just let us know in the comments. Welcome everyone to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design with a little bit of zest. In this episode, we're going to talk about working solo versus working with a team. Guess who didn't have the music ready? 1 second. Sorry. 1, 2, 3.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compress.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Hugh Quick, and I am a developer, speaker, and teacher.
Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi. I'm a front-end developer at Atlassian working on Confluence.
And hey, friends, I am Becca. I'm the developer experience lead at OpenSauce.
Welcome, everyone. Brad, you kind of introduced the idea in chat right before we went live. This idea of working solo versus working with a team, project management, the different pieces of the team, how important they are. And then Becca on Twitter Space yesterday, we talked about my project / community driven project, Deals for Devs, and me kind of learning about going from working as an individual developer to maintaining an open source project with a small amount of people, 10 people contributing or so, something like that, and all the things that I've learned. So we're going to kind of combine all that together in our conversation today. But Brad, do you want to kind of kick us off on maybe just a quick perspective on the bigger, like working for a bigger company, project, team, and then we can maybe go smaller from there?
Yeah, I'll start off with that. I think there's like a very perfect team composition when you're working in a big company. All teams should have these different types of representatives. So it's 5 things that need to be on a team. One, you've got your engineering manager or your people manager. They try to get people promoted, they help unblock the team, they work on cross team collaboration. The second big piece, I think, is a project or product manager, where they are really in charge of like setting direction for what you're building. They can kind of talk to potential customers or do things like that to kind of define the scope and requirements of what you're building. The third, really important person to have on the team is a designer. So they work very closely with the engineer and the product manager to come up with mock-ups and designs. And then you've got your 2 different types of engineers, front end and back end. So I think if you have all 5 of those types of people, you've got the perfect team composition. I guess let's stop there and like get your thoughts on that. Do you think we're missing anything? Do you think one of those isn't as crucial as I think it is?
I think for me, it depends on what the strengths and weaknesses are of everyone on the team. And so, there's this book, The Five Working Geniuses or something like that.
Mm.
Anyway, I read it and I felt that it was really interesting because it talks about different strengths. And some of them, for example, are like, I'm a starter. I'm really good at starting things. I'm really good at motivating people, or I'm a finisher, right? I love to be at the end of the project to see it through and to let it go live. And so I can't remember what the other ones are, but but I found that being able to work with people that are motivated in different ways is maybe a little bit of a different take on this, because I've come from, so I'm working at a startup that we have like 8 people, right? So I don't even think we could fill that team with the people that we have. But I think we do a really great job of working efficiently, because we're all just motivated in different ways. And there's enough space in our understanding of our jobs and our roles in a small startup where we are able to succeed. So I think, depending on the understanding and what the needs are of your team, that there might be, you might not necessarily need all of those roles, but as long as people can keep that momentum and that motivation, then you can have a successful team. So I do think like that sounds like the ideal team, but maybe is not necessary. And I don't think that's what you were saying, Brad, but I think that there's maybe some room for um
Like
looking at it from a
personalities in
motivation.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I took this like work personality quiz on gun.io, Taylor Desson's place.
Hey, yeah.
And it's really cool because it told me a lot about like who I am as a contributor, and it was like spot on. They're like, you're the you're the starter, you're the innovator, you're the tackle big technical problems head on and try to come out with a solution. Not so much a finisher or a politician or a socializer. So everybody does work way differently.
Yeah, I think there's also a really interesting take of a lot of companies, a lot of places don't have the ability to break down into those different categories, or maybe they choose not to. I don't know. But I think back to my work at FedEx, like we had developers. We didn't have front end or back end. We had we had a team of BAs, some of which were semi-technical with like doing SQL queries and bash scripts and that kind of stuff. But we didn't have front end versus back end, and we most certainly didn't have a designer, and that hurt us really, really bad. And I would say this is like, you look at culturally FedEx just being really old, and they've been around since the 70s or whatever. So the way they operate is probably just behind a lot of what we're used to if you worked for a more recent, newer company. And yeah, from a design perspective, like that's always been, it's infinitely more difficult for me to build something and try to make up the design for myself as a non-designer versus having a well-defined design that I can go and work with. And we'll talk about this later for Deals for Devs, work with a designer and having him do all that work so that I have that, like, here's exactly what I need to build, is a game changer. And so a lot of companies just maybe by choice, maybe it's by older culture, maybe it's by just the way they've been doing it for too long. But it definitely was a missed opportunity for us. Of it made things a lot more difficult. specifically not having a designer.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, of those 5 roles in a team, most often than not, you'll see 2 of those roles not filled. It's your
Hmm.
designer and your product manager.
Yeah.
And those 2 kind of flex roles that I find just absolutely crucial, because a manager is not going to tell you what to build,
Yeah.
and an engineer is not going to design it. And I think more often than not, I find myself in teams, and specifically, like, normally if you're ever building internal tooling or back end tooling, something that's not customer facing, you find yourself in this spot where it's like, I don't know, manager and engineers just work together to figure out what it is we need to build. And that's very challenging. And I think this is where we can get into a whole nother conversation of, like, if you're ever left in that spot, what do you do? How do you come up with the requirements? How do you come up with the design in that case? Um, I've got some thoughts, but I definitely want to hear what you guys think.
You go ahead, Becca.
No, I was just gonna say designer I think is so huge. It's so key.
Oh.
And I'm a boot camp grad and that wasn't really much talked about, like being able to take designs and implement them. And one of my first interviews, they said, we're gonna give you design and now you have to, code this design. I was like, okay, like I'm gonna try this. And I actually really enjoyed it because I'm not a designer. I'm not good at design. My very first blog, I tried to design. I thought like you have to design yourself to show what you can do, right? And it was like so terrible. And then the second iteration, I bought a template and just used that, right? Because that made it so much a million times better and also made it way more accessible as well. But I think that it it's a special skill set and you have to understand like that's the other thing, I guess, Brad. Like, what are the skill sets of the people on the
Yeah.
team? Because I find that design is often like so much different or separate from the other things that we're doing that you're just putting like extra cognitive load on your engineers or whoever's implementing this if you don't give them that instruction. And they're going to be way less effective, I
Mhm.
think, if they have to try and tap into something that's not their skill set and they don't have expertise in.
I even think it's harder without a product manager too. Like, without a product manager, how do you know what it is you're supposed to build besides the one sentence that your manager gives you? Hey guys, we're going to build an observability tool. It's going to be really helpful for the other teams. Have at it.
Go. Yeah.
Go. Yeah. Um, so some of the things that I guess I've done to try to, like, hash this out. Uh, One of the first things that I try to do when things are uncertain, when you're lacking some crucial pieces on the team, is I try to clarify who owns what part. Obviously, somebody has to own the requirements, the project timeline, the acceptance criteria, the definition of done, those types of things. And if you can really, like, first of all, identify who owns that, that's a critical piece because that has to get done first. Now, a lot of times, unfortunately, that ownership rolls up to your manager, but your manager also probably isn't going to be sitting there writing definition of done documents for you, acceptance criteria for you, and whatnot. So, what I've also found is, number one, establish ownership, but number two, just do your best at doing it yourself. So, you write a document, you write down what you think needs to be built, and then the end of that document it essentially has an approval section where it's like, okay, I did the hard work, but you present it to the stakeholder, which is the manager at the time, and say, does this look right to you before you ever get to coding? That way, once they sign off and you start coding, you say, no, no, this is what we agreed to. If there's changes to it, we'll do it in a later version
Mhm.
or, discuss how it impacts the architecture. That's the best way that I've got for gaining commitment early on.
There's I feel like unfortunately, a lot of my conversations end up like kind of bashing my experience at FedEx. But again, just such an older culture. And they went down the route of trying to go really agile. And by going agile, because it's such a big company, they adopted this thing called SAFe, which is scaled agile framework, basically agile for really large companies, which is ironic because it added all this overhead of things that we had to do. But the position that I was in at FedEx was my team was working on these different sort systems from different parts of the world and trying to combine them into one modern sort system that could be used all across the world. And the biggest struggle we had was we didn't have people who could clearly define our requirements. And if you look at, people may have heard of waterfall versus agile. Waterfall is where somebody spends 6 months thinking about all the different use cases, all the different requirements, all the different things you're going to need for this massive project. And so by the time you actually start development, it may be a 2-year project, but you have all the things clearly defined at that point. Agile, in a lot of good ways, goes the opposite of like, all right, what do we need to get started? Let's start building the thing here. We can add this feature based on user feedback. We're going to add this next feature. It gives you the ability to prioritize as you go and figure out what those details are. For us, it really burned us though, because we just really didn't know what we were building, and no one could officially be that owner with the knowledge that was necessary. And I think that's a big key, is a lot of times you have people that are in the position of being a product owner and they don't really know what the product is or what the product should be on a detailed enough level. So we would build some stuff and present, and they would be like, yeah, that looks good, without any like real context and ownership of how this is going to be used. And so I think one opportunity is to spend time with the actual users of the product. Now, for us, this was an internal tool, so we could go down to the hub where people use this and actually sort packages, and we could talk to people. Not that we did a great job of that, but you can actually go and get like one-on-one time with the actual users of your product. When you build something external, it gets a little more tricky, but you can do some sort of user feedback, send out a newsletter to say, hey, we want you to try blah, 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 or whatever it is. But I think especially if your product owner is not knowledgeable enough to really give you definitive answers on what you're building and what the specific details should be and how it should work, acceptance criteria, et cetera, going to your users as best you can help fill that gap.
That's where I say, if your product owner isn't knowledgeable enough, they're not doing their job. That's like
Yeah.
saying my manager doesn't know what I do
Right.
on a daily basis. Don't get me wrong, you have to kind of tell your manager what you do
Yep.
on a daily basis, but it's kind of the product owner, the product manager's job to like
Mm-hmm.
figure that out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's why I
for-
think it's one of the most crucial pieces in any project.
Yeah. If you're left with ambiguity, it turned, like, we had a really good developer leave our team for that reason, and I was
Yep.
much less interested in my role at the time because of that reason.
Yep.
The other thing that was unfortunate at FedEx was, because of this adoption of Safe, I think they just started assigning people in different places without acknowledging they don't have the expertise necessary, and without acknowledging that, also not acknowledging, hey, we need to give them the opportunity to specifically be knowledgeable enough to answer these questions.
Yeah.
And it just felt like one of those things where they were checking boxes to do agile, to do safe, without really understanding, here's the things that we need to make this successful. I'm trying to read Becca's eyes. I think she's clicking the
She's
microphone.
got something.
I think.
No, no. Well, I thought that Brad was gonna say something, so I didn't
Okay.
want to jump in there. I was gonna
It's
give
all
Brad
you.
the opportunity. And I think everybody here is spot on. And one of the biggest things that I learned since moving into tech is the importance of documentation, right? My background is in teaching college English. Didn't really have to document anything for anyone. Here's a syllabus, read it, you do the work, right? And then you come in, and I think that community ends up playing a big role in a lot of this, because they're the ones that are often providing you with feedback. But what is the mechanism for feedback? Who's collecting that? What do you do with the feedback that you're given? Because you can say, like, give us feedback, but if you don't know how to deal with it, or if you don't know how to collect it, then that's not really useful, right? And so you just
Yeah.
spend a lot of time just like spinning wheels if you don't have these processes defined. And sometimes it's hard, and sometimes if you're on a small team, you don't know who owns what, and then somebody just steps up, right? Or like, I have a teammate, John McBride, who is just fantastic at writing docs. And so we had a feature launch recently, and he had like this whole doc that he put together about, like, these are the steps, these are the stakeholders, everybody needs to sign off on the things that we're doing. And that was incredibly useful from the previous feature launch that we had, because it was like, okay, now I know how to look at this doc. I know the questions that I need to ask. I know who I need to go to for certain things. And it was just kind of like ironing out that path for everyone. But like having that documentation there becomes, it makes things more accessible to everybody who is on the team to understand, like, these are the goals and we all need to be working towards them together. So yeah, spot on.
Yeah, I think documentation does like two primary things. You're right. It gives everybody a place to kind of gather and give feedback. if it's not documented, it just goes out into the ether and never gets solidified. So one document, everybody knows where to find it, where to look at it, how to comment, how to talk about it. The second thing is, if you're the author, you will always look good. I wrote a document describing this feature. I wrote a document, setting out our project plan. Like, it's just perfect promotion material, or perfect material that you can share with people above you to say, like, look at the impact that I have. Um, Documents are great for stuff like that. Big companies love them. Should definitely write stuff like that. And that goes for
I think
like planning projects, and getting stakeholders involved, or even just like, hey, I solved this hard technical problem. Let me just write 3 paragraphs about it and throw it out there. Somebody's going to stumble on it.
I think it's also helpful for onboarding anybody new that comes onto your team, or like, James, you're saying somebody left because of that. But like if you're replacing somebody, then they have to know where to go. And like I'm a huge proponent of making a good onboarding experience for people so they can, feel comfortable, they can feel safe, and they can hit the ground running. Because when you don't have any of that stuff set up, then you're just kind of sitting there like, okay, what do you want me to be doing next, right?
That's one of the most demotivating situations I think you can be in. And retention is such an important thing. And like you're very likely to use people if they actually enjoy working on fun challenges and writing code. And I've been around a lot of this too. If they just want to sit around and get their check, like that's the space for them, is when they don't have requirements and they can just sit around and get paid. But for people
Yeah.
that actually enjoy what they do, they need to have enough direction and clarity to be able to go and do the thing and actually solve those challenges. Otherwise, like I said, that person left, very talented developer, ended up coming back later on, after a year or two, I think. But that was part of the reason I left too. It was just so much ambiguity. And we kind of touched on this, like lack of ownership from who do we finally report this to? Like not just a product owner, but from upper management. We had two competing teams, one in the US, one in Europe. Both of us had opinions, and we had no clear owner who could say make a definitive decision. Anyway, it was an exciting place to be because it was working on brand new stuff, but it was very, very difficult just from lack of clarity, direction, requirements, etc.
Going back to the onboarding comments that you were making, Becca, I think this is where open source either lives or dies. If a project is hard to contribute to or hard to get involved in, you won't have contributors. Big companies will obviously train up their employees. It's fine. You've got coworkers. It's fine. So now I really want to hear about, like, James, your deals for dev, and Becca, your open source stuff. What do you do to like facilitate bringing people on, showing them the ropes, getting their first PRs in?
Yeah, Becca, do you want to go first with open source?
Sure. This is actually super pertinent. There was a tweet last week, anyway, in the last couple of weeks, where somebody said when they're making decisions for their team about what technology to use, they go to the docs first. And if they're not accessible, they move on to the next thing. So they don't even
Hmm.
bother to evaluate the technology. It's just like documentation is poor. We're not going to use this, right?
Yep.
Because it requires so much more time and energy to be able to implement that thing. So for us at Open Sauce, we're trying very hard to create a contributor journey or a contributor ladder where people can start at the beginning. They're just getting into it, they're interested in open source, but they can progress throughout our issues and our documentation to things that are increasingly more challenging or fulfilling for them, whether that's in growing their skills or adding to their resume or just contributing to something that's interesting to them, right? Because like you can have a million beginner issues, but if you're beyond beginner, it's going to get a little boring. So we have community repos where folks can contribute for the first time. We have an intro course. We're going to have a maintainers course probably in the next 2 weeks that will go live too, just to kind of help, like, hey, if you want to get started, here's a good way to start. There's plenty of documentation issues. And I just have to give a big shout out to Ayu, who is one of our community and docs maintainers who volunteers, because she does an excellent job of creating good first issues for people. And I think that's a really good way to onboard people as well. So she's always evaluating, like, what does our documentation look like? Okay, these people had questions or they didn't submit the pull request in the right way. Like, what are we doing that's making it unclear that they haven't followed the directions? And if you see there's a string of folks who are contributing and they're not following all of the guidelines, then I think it's a good indication that you need to go back to your own guidelines and evaluate them and say, like, how can we make this clearer for people? And is this an issue we want to take on versus an issue that we want someone else to work on? So if it's a quick improvement, actually, sometimes those are really good first issues because you really have to spell it out, or it's a good onboarding experience in writing a good first issue to spell out all of the different things that you need to do. It gives people confidence and allows them to contribute in a way that decreases that barrier to entry. And then as we go forward, we try and write issues or discussions where people can contribute in a way that gives them kind of like buy-in to feedback on the product, understanding like this is useful to growing the product and feeling it like they're almost part of the team and being able to provide that feedback and see that issue move forward.
You mentioned like making sure that they were following the process and things like that. Some of that stuff has to be like automatable, right? Like GitHub's got templates for issues and pull requests, and you could probably write your own like bot to double check those kinds of things. How much do you see that leveraged in open source?
I mean, I think it's one of those things that's a balance, right? Because people want personal interaction. But also there's just so much required of maintainers that you don't want to burn them out. So there's the balance of like being able to automate those things and personalize at the same time. And so 100% issue forms are the way to go. It just makes things so much easier for you to see like, okay, here's how things are working. These are the problems that I have to look at or the features that I need to think about implementing. And then pull request templates are huge as well. I really wish they had pull request forms. I don't know why there are not pull request forms, but I feel like talking about this all the time now. Because working with a template is a little bit tricky to kind of understand and read if you haven't done it before. So especially for new contributors who are trying to like understand what do I need to fill out, what don't I need to fill out, it feels a little tricky. But we lean into saved responses. We lean into using GitHub Actions to provide feedback. Every issue that's created for us at OpenSauce automatically gets the triage label, and nobody can assign themselves an issue until that triage label is taken down. So that can be taken down by the triage team or any of the maintainers of our project. But the point is, like, we need some time to look over this and say, like, is this actually a bug? Is this actually a feature that we would like to see enhance our product? And so that gives us a little bit of time. But also, if it doesn't have the triage label, it gives people the autonomy because they can use the .take command, which uses a GitHub action to self-assign an issue. So there's definitely like that balance of being able to lean into those automations and provide the personal response.
Wait, talk to me about this .take command. I nerd out on like automations. Is this a CLI thing, or is this like you comment .take and it does it in the issue or the comment?
Yep. You comment .take, and so
Awesome.
I think it's on BDougie's GitHub repository. I'll try and grab it in a second so you can see it. And like one of the things that we're making an update with that is if somebody has already taken a good first issue, this is going to be the next update. They cannot take a second good first issue because you have already done your first. There's no second first issue, right? So it does like kind of streamline that process and make it a little bit quicker so maintainers aren't constantly having to respond. But I'll grab that and put it in the chat.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. James, what about your like deals for devs? Like, I feel like you're kind of just bringing this project up off the ground. You've been working on it for a little while, but like maybe one of your first larger open source type projects. How's it going?
Oh, easily. Yeah, this is by far the most open sourcey I've ever been. Like I've had repos on GitHub, but just for demos for YouTube videos, course repo actually that Brad you built a good portion of the vast majority of for the Astro course. Um, but it's never been like a back and forth thing or a maintain thing. It's really just been like, here's the sample code, take it for what it's worth. It's out there if you want it. And so, quick background, like Deals for Dev started as something for me that I just kind of built as a demo where it was like, let's list Black Friday deals for developers. And then found out that it was actually getting traffic to the point where I was like, I should invest in this. And at the very least, by Black Friday of 2024, so in 6 months from now or whatever, I want to have something that's even better and get more traffic and blah, blah, blah. And there was an opportunity to do affiliate links and potentially take sponsorships for sponsoring some of the deals on there to be highlighted on the homepage or whatever. And Chris Wicks, who I've talked about a lot recently, kind of reached out, said he was interested in getting some more real world ish experience, and talked to him at that conference in Texas. And anyway, he decided to contribute, and then it just kind of snowballed where he was like, oh, so and so is interested in contributing too, and then also so and so is interested, and then I'd get a DM, hey, I'd love to like contribute to the project as well. So I don't know what, like, we maybe have 20 people in a private channel in Discord, some of which are pretty passive. Some people have taken on some issues and submitted PRs and stuff already, which is really, really cool. And so basically all of this as a maintainer is new for me. Like I've worked with a development team before. So I've done branching strategies and things like that. But not in a way that I'm interacting with people, a lot of people that are really beginner and either doing first issues or kind of getting into how do I create branches? How do I create PRs? That sort of stuff. And so we've been really fortunate to have some people step in and like make suggestions for templates, like you mentioned, Becca, and documentation, and trying to, from my perspective, which this is difficult because it's not the kind of stuff I enjoy, to be honest, documenting like, here are the features we need, here are the issues, here are the bugs, and labeling them and trying to find stuff that are good for first issues or second first issues, which I think would be a fun label to have, and labeling them based on priority. And some of that has died down a little bit. So I think we've probably lost a little momentum recently, but really spent a lot of time with several people sharing suggestions and opinions of how do we structure this in a way that is successful and makes sense for people that onboard and can contribute. And I think for me, most importantly, for people that are contributing, because this seems to be the common trend, is they actually get experience that they can take with them to an interview, put on their resume, etc., that is more real world than just working by yourself. And maybe we'll kind of go down the working solo in a minute. But when I work solo, I push to main and see if it works, and if it doesn't, push another thing, and blah blah blah. Like now we actually have this process. And one of the things that I am actually really proud of, and I think is a cool workflow, is we almost exclusively, I'll come back to this in a second, do PRs to the dev branch. So the idea is we're working on features, we contribute them to the dev branch. At a certain point, that becomes a version or a snapshot, and then that goes to staging and then gets tested, and then that gets promoted to main. So we have this workflow that most people aren't used to. They're used to just submitting a PR to the main branch. And so we've had to like try to kind of teach, this is why we're doing that. But one issue I had with that's kind of interesting, is if people are doing documentation PRs, ideally we would like to have those on main immediately so that they show up when they actually, like a template for issues or whatever. So if we had originally, I was like, oh, you should do the PR to dev, but then those things that we're looking for in the actual GitHub experience aren't there because they're not on the main branch. So there's actually a caveat to that where, like, if we have a situation for documentation or something that we want to go there, we'll actually submit 2 PRs, one to main and one to dev, because you don't want to reverse pulling stuff from main into dev or vice versa if you're not ready. And anyway, that's been a little bit of an interesting caveat to that process. But every PR is an intentional commit to an intentional branch for an intentional reason.
In the past at Dell, we did this thing called cherry picking. So yeah, your release branch is like this holy thing that only blessed things go into, right? And you cannot put anything there that hasn't been through the ringer. And so you cherry pick from the way they did it was like your main branch was that everything just goes right into there, but you would cherry pick features into your release branch saying this one's been tested and blessed, this one's been tested and blessed. So like you're still submitting PRs right to main, but you're just kind of just getting a release branch ready in parallel. So that's like kind of on the back end. You're kind of doing it on the front end of like your dev is where everything's going, but main is your blessed branch. So
Yep.
good, same concept. But yeah, check out the git cherry pick command instead of
Okay.
doing that double direction merge. It
Yeah.
might be a little more helpful.
Okay. It's funny how many start to realize how inexperienced you are. Me, like I start to realize how inexperienced I am. Like a lot of developers, I do commit, push, pull, reset if I just want to get rid of, and I don't do almost anything else. And so I think some of my lack of experience shows there as well, especially when it comes to like this type of thing. So I'm sure there's tons of different additional tips that people could have for me to better maintain that across like however many people we have contributing.
I think Chantastic has a free course on Epic Web about Git.
Hmm.
I haven't checked it out, but I know when we talked to Kent a couple weeks ago, I was like, okay, this sounds really interesting. I want to check it out because I also feel the same way. Like I still get confused with rebase. I get freaked out if
Yeah.
if GitHub is like, you need to rebase something. I'm like, no, I don't want to. Like I gotta search it up
Search
and
it up.
figure out like which one I want to be which I really need there in that situation because it is very similar experience.
Yeah, I think like when you do an initial poll, if you don't have it already set, like globally, it'll ask you if you want to handle conflicts with merge or rebase. I have no idea how rebase works. I've only done merge. I legitimately have no idea.
I hate rebase. It's so complicated. I tried to switch to that workflow for a little bit when I was working on Trello, and I just couldn't get my head around it. And for a brief period in time, I understood its benefits, but I was like, it's not worth it. And so I'm just a merge guy. But yeah, there's some errors that you get in Git when you try to do a poll and it yells at you about not being able to
Yeah.
do something. Then I found out that you can just put -no-ff, so no fast forward merge. So it'll do like a different kind of merge and then it'll work. And I'm like, okay, I can do
All
that.
right. That's where
Yeah.
I'm going.
The new trick. Yeah. Has anybody used the stash command? The git stash command?
I use it all the time.
Dude, amazing. It's just like, hold on, let me put all this crap over here while I switch branches and then bring it back later. That's the best.
Feels like when I'm trying to clean my house and I'm like, I'm done with this section. Gonna move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just throw all this in the closet so nobody sees it. Stash it in there.
That's right. Except my kids always want to open up the closet. I swear, every time I just like we've had people coming over, I've run out of time. Closet, and they're like, and here's our front closet. I'm like, why would you even show people that?
You guys, quick, check out what mommy and daddy did before you came over.
They're proud of all the things that you have to offer.
Guess so.
Yeah, so when you guys work solo, what do y'all do? I know I've got a macro that just says git add commit push send. That's it.
Basically, I use the dev branch some, but not very often. Like I'll start to get in a process of doing dev and then merging that into main when I'm ready. And then I also then go through phases. Again, it's just me. I'm just like, it's not worth doing that. And I'll just push right to main. And then later on, I have to do from dev, like a pull from main to make
Yeah.
sure it has the latest code because I haven't been contributing to dev. So yeah, it's really not very structured, which is kind of the reason this was exciting for me, was to get back into a flow of like actually trying to follow some sort of structure.
I
Yeah, it's
also
the same thing for me.
go ahead.
If I'm working on my personal site or a personal project, very rarely do I branch unless I'm doing like a very big change where I'm like, okay, I want to be able to easily revert all of the things that I've just done, then I'll branch, so it makes it easier for me. But otherwise it's just like, I'm going to push it. If it doesn't work, then I'm going to fix it. And I that's the safe process that I've gone through.
Yeah, I still manage a couple like NPM libraries, and so I'll do PRs there. I'll generate release notes, and then I'll cut release, or I'll release on tag. I'm always merging to main, but it doesn't go out until I actually tag it.
Oh, how do you set that up? Like, is that a GitHub action?
GitHub action, and so like the field that says on, it's not on a branch, it's on tag, and then you can just tell it, okay, now do something. So I just push to main. Well, I'll make a branch, finish a feature, merge that into main so that it all goes in as one commit, because I do squash commits. Goes in as one commit that says added this feature. And that's great because it makes the release notes like real clean too. And then everything's set in main, and you just tag it at whatever version you want, and then it goes out. I need to like, I never adopted conventional commits and change sets and all that stuff to kind of automate that type of process. I'll get there one day, but I was just like, it's way too much overhead.
Interesting. What I feel like I should know this, and I'm going to ask all the questions I'm semi-embarrassed to ask. So squash commits. This is when you do like multiple commits, you have multiple commit messages, right? Squash commits takes all those in a given PR and just says like, we're just going to erase the history of commit messages and just put them under one commit message. Is that what that means?
You can think about it that way. Yeah. At the end of the day, it basically just says, like you made these 10 commits to dev since you branched off of main. We're going to smash all these together. And when you merge it into main, when you merge that pull request, it's going to come in as one commit with all those changes.
Yeah.
And that just makes, if you need to back out that entire feature, really easy.
We should definitely add that. I think I've known at a high level that's probably the way to go for a lot of different things in the past, and I've never looked into to actually like set it up or use it myself. Is there a downside to that?
So that's typically when you get into the squash versus rebase discussions. It's a method of doing the exact same thing.
Okay.
Almost the exact same thing. And I no longer remember the differences between them. But yeah, it's a way to essentially get in one commit from per PR into your main branch.
Okay.
That's
There's
also what we
reasons.
use both like at OpenSauce and Virtual Coffee.
Squash.
Yeah.
So is that something like when is it a squash command? When do you run that? Like how do you actually squash? How do you use that feature?
There's a setting in your GitHub repository where you can choose what happens when a PR is merged in. And so then as the maintainer or PR reviewer that has the permissions to be able to merge that in, you'll see like at the bottom on GitHub where there's the green button to merge, it will say like squash and merge. And you actually might be able to change it every time. I'm not positive about that, but like when you go to merge, there might be a little like drop down arrow that lets you choose.
So you have a choice. In your repo settings, you can allow merge commits, which is probably what you don't want. You can allow squash commits, or you can allow rebase. And I always turn off everything except for squash commits on my repos. And so then when you press the green button to merge, I only have one button that just says squash and merge, done. But if your repository has enabled all of those, just like Becca was saying, you get a choice based on what you've enabled.
Okay. See, all these small things that you just don't know until you actually get there.
Okay.
and use
Okay.
it.
The description in GitHub. Am I online?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Wait,
We
can
can
not
hear you,
us?
Brad.
Am I back? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Everything freaked out for a second. GitHub actually has a really good description of squash merging versus rebase merging. So squash merging combines all commits on the PR branch into a single commit and then commits it to the base branch. Rebase merging is when it takes the uh, the base branch and replays each commit from the PR branch onto the main branch. That's add all commits from the head branch onto the base branch individually. That doesn't seem helpful for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know how that's different because those like versus just
Besides
like
from a
applying
merge
the
commit, yeah, I
merge.
don't know.
Yeah,
Oh man.
yeah, I don't
I would
know.
say like one of the things, so this is almost an aside to what we're talking about, but at Virtual Coffee every year we do a big Hacktoberfest event. And I think that people often underestimate all of the knowledge that you have to work with open source projects, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a whole new vocabulary that you often have to learn, especially if you've been used to working by yourself. It can be very new. And a couple of years ago, we had a contributor he was contributing to open source for the first time, but had a stellar resume of many like very big companies that you would know the names of, right? Had done some really amazing work, but just had never contributed to open source. And so I remember he asked me, like, I would like to be paired up with a mentor. And I was like, you have more experience than anyone I know, but I will find you someone who I can pair you up with. And it was just that, like, the whole thing about onboarding, understanding that there
Yeah.
is a barrier to entry. There are things that you need to learn. And I've been doing this for a little while now. And like, there are tons of settings that I don't know about, or like, we implemented code owners in a bunch of our repositories and we forgot, like, I think you're supposed to have an asterisk and then maybe a space, but like, maybe we didn't have the space or something, right? And so it hadn't been working for a long time. Code owners, you can put it in a repository if you have a code owners file in there. I'll try and grab a blog post from my teammate Nick Taylor who wrote about it. But anytime someone submits a PR, it will notify the code owners and GitHub there is a PR that needs to be reviewed. And so, like, we have one, for example, for the docs team, and we were not getting notified. And IU, again, she was like, "Are you getting notified for this?" I'm like, "Nah, I just check it every day," and she was the proactive one that was like, "Okay, we are formatting this improperly, so let's fix this so it works." But little things like that. A year ago, I had no idea what code owners was, but it makes it easier for you to work with an open source project and make sure those PRs are getting merged in.
And if I'm not mistaken, code owners is like a feature per version control product. Like GitHub has its own code owners implementation and Bitbucket has its own. And so each one, I guess, does it a little bit differently. I don't think it's any kind of like open standard or anything. Can you confirm that? You sure?
I cannot confirm that.
No? 'Cause,
And I wish
yeah.
I could. I mean, just that the majority of folks use GitHub. And so I would say that's the majority of my knowledge base. But it seems like it would be one of those things that anybody working in open source would find very useful.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at this and like GitLab has its own version of it. GitHub has its version of it. But I wonder if the code owners files are
A standard
all of
some
the
sort.
same format. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a comment in the chat I wanted to bring up that is the most important thing to know is knowing what you don't know. And I think like I'm like semi embarrassed to say I don't fully know what squashing is, right? But it's also one of those things where I'm comfortable enough in my career that I know I'm capable. It's not because I'm not smart. I just haven't specifically done that myself. And I think that's a luxury to get to that point in your career. And a lot of people are so uncomfortable saying I don't know. And especially in interviews, I think one of the biggest red flags for me if I'm interviewing someone is you explain something to me incorrectly. And it's not that I expect you to be like 100% perfect, but it's like you obviously don't know the thing or understand it. And instead of being able to recognize that you don't and or communicate that you just don't know and accept that, making up something becomes that much worse for me because then I wonder if you're working on production code, if you don't know how something works, you're just going to ship something and not fully understand it. And that's much more detrimental than it is for us to have a conversation of like what this thing is, how it works, why you should do it differently, etc. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of like knowing what you don't know and being comfortable knowing that you don't know everything. We actually had an episode on that a few episodes back. That is really important to me.
Yeah, and it's hard because you don't sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you come up on it, and you're like, oh dang, this is a gap. I better ramp up on this.
Yep.
It just all comes down to the experiences and the companies you've had on the projects you've worked with, and a lot of times some of the senior engineers you've worked with, because a lot of times those types of folks have really helped me establish like the way I do things, my patterns and things like that. So depends on who
Yeah,
you work
exactly.
with.
Yep. Becca, just saw your message. I actually I didn't realize it was that late. Do y'all want to skip picks and plugs and just go ahead and wrap up?
We can still do picks and plugs. Oh,
You want to?
no, Brad says that's good.
I'm fine
We
with
can-
I'm
we
fine
can
with either.
skip them.
Yeah.
Either way.
I
don't
got
have
stuff-
anything.
I
Let's
got
do
stuff
picks and
prepared.
plugs because that's how we normally
Okay.
end.
All right. And now let's move into our last section of the podcast, which is our picks and plugs section, where we pick something that we enjoyed recently that we read, watched, bought on Amazon, etc. And something that we want to plug for ourselves. Becca, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my pick this week is sometimes it's hard to pick between pick or plug. But I'm gonna pick the Big Cash Money cohort that I'm in. Saran Yitbarek from Code Newbie fame has these cohorts going for people who are interested in creating income from their projects. And so it's been really great to have some accountability, some people pushing me forward, and to kind of create, like, be part of a community, especially for someone who's used to like co-running a community. To be part of one is really nice. And I really appreciate all the work that they're putting into that. So that's my pick for this week.
Do you have a plug?
Oh,
also?
and wait, I've got to do a plug right now. Sorry, I was thinking we were all doing picks. So my plug for this week is going to be open source repository pages, which is a feature that we just shipped. That's pretty cool. So you can now check out a repository on OpenSauce. You can see their stars anywhere from the last 7 days to the last year, as well as their forks too. So it just gives you a little bit more insight into what their project has been doing. And it's a really nice visual way to look at, is there a correspondence between their forks and their stars? Because if there's not, then it's more than likely a marketing push that got all of the stars, rather than like, hey, there's a lot of people who are invested in this project. So really, really love our new feature, and shout out to our team for shipping that feature.
What was the name of the feature one more time?
It is repository pages.
Brad, do you want to go?
Sweet. Yeah. So my pick for today isn't actually happening until tomorrow, but Epic Web Conf starts tomorrow. I'm bummed that I couldn't make it to that conference, but like I cannot wait to watch the live stream. It's going to be so good. So that's Kent C. Dodd's conference, talking about his Epic Web stack and his just opinions on how to build for the web. Let me grab the link for that. It is live streaming on YouTube on the Epic Web Dev channel. So I'll share that link. Boom. Okay. And then as far as my plug for this week, it's YouTube as well. I've been publishing a bunch of remix videos, so youtube.com/BradGarapy. And I've got a couple more remix videos coming out here soon. And then I'll be publishing some shorter form videos there, just kind of like talking about little opinions or hot takes or things like that. So youtube.com/BradGarapy. More videos coming.
Sweet. Love that. I'm excited to see you doing more video stuff, which I've always enjoyed from you. I am scrolling through Amazon. I don't know. I'll pick a TV show that I just started on Netflix called Justified. I went to Nashville to hang out with one of my best friends and his wife, and we were just talking about TV show. We watched a lot of New Girl. We're all big New Girl fans, and they said that their favorite show of all time is Justified. So I started watching that. I'm only a couple episodes in, but enjoying it so far. And then I will plug Deals for Devs. So if you're interested in the latest deals for developers on courses, ebooks, hardware, conferences, etc., you can check it out at dealsfordevs.com. All right, that is going to wrap up this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you're listening in Podcatcher, make sure to leave us a rating and review if you enjoyed it, so that other people can find the podcast and we can continue to have fun conversations with ourselves and bring on amazing guests on the episodes as well. In the meantime, that's all we got. Love the comment. It's over already. Yeah. Sorry. I think you made it. You made it like halfway through, I think. I can't remember exactly when you joined.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dream.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and call it. Thanks, everyone.